Let's talk about probability and odds. All right, there's a bunch of vocab we got to take care of here first. So let's talk about what actual probability means. I'd write a bunch of this stuff down. I'm going to go quick, so you're probably going to want to pause it when you have an opportunity to write some of it. So probability, it's the chance of something happening, right? The measure of likelihood. Normally we measure it on a scale from 0 to 1. Okay, and the reason why I use 0 to 1 is because if I turn this into a percent, I'm going to end up with 0% here and 100% here. Okay, well, this means this never happens, right? And this always happens. And in between, you're going to have 50-50, right? 50% chance of happening, right? Even chance of something happening. Here you have about 25%, which is not likely, okay? Not likely. 75% I would say is likely to happen, right? And then 50 is sort of like even chances, right? An even chance of happening. Okay, so, and you could fill in, we have 0.25. Sometimes people will write it just as a decimal. So that's the scale that we use to measure probability. Okay, and so the closer obviously something is 0, the less likely it is, and the closer it is to 1, the more likely it is to happen. All right, so a couple things we need to talk about. There's this thing called outcome. Okay, an outcome is a possible result. We'll talk more about outcomes here in a minute. An event is a specific outcome or a possible outcome. And again, we'll talk about this more in a second here. We have what's called theoretical probability and experimental probability. So theoretical is you don't actually do the experiment or whatever the thing you're looking for is. You just sort of measure what should happen and you do it on paper. Okay, so in this one is you look at all the total possibilities and then you look for what are called favorable outcomes. And again, we'll talk more about what this means, but I want you to get this get these words into your notes so that we can refer back to them. All right, then we have experimental probability. This is when you actually do something and you use the results in order to predict what might happen in the future. So in this case, we talk about number of trials. This is the number of attempts you make at something, and the number of successes, right? How many times you succeed at whatever it is that you're trying to do. And again, we'll talk more about this in a little bit. All right. Then we have what's called odds. Okay, so odds are a little bit different. Odds are when you use the outcomes and you measure it against other outcomes. So rather than doing it against the total number of possibilities, you use it against like how many times you succeed compared to how many times you fail, okay? Or the favorable outcomes compared to unfavorable. Oftentimes what we did before is we would talk about favorable outcomes over the total possibilities, okay? But this is more about how many times you get what you're looking for compared to how many times you don't get what you get one for, okay? And it's just successes compared to failures. And then odds against is just the reverse, okay? You look at unfavorable outcomes or you look at your failures and then compare it to your successes. Okay, so let's talk about this. I'm not going to actually do the spins of these coins. We can do this a little bit more in class tomorrow. But what I want you to look at is I want you to say, okay, 2-coin spin, what are the possible outcomes? So I want to know what are all the possible outcomes. In fact, we'll do this. We'll say, let's say, well, right now it has 2 tails, right? So we have tails and tails, tails and tails. And what I want to know is what's the probability of getting a tails and a tails? Well, in order to do this, we need to know the number of outcomes, right? And so in the number of outcomes there's this nice thing that's called the counting principle. And what the counting principle says is, however the number of outcomes you have for one event, okay, meaning one yeah, one event here, so flipping a coin, okay, how many choices are there here? Well, I have 2 choices, right? Heads or tails. And then what I say is, okay, the second event I'm doing, what are the number of choices I have here? Well, there are 2 possible outcomes here, so I have 2 there. The counting principle says you can just multiply them together in order to generate the total number of possibilities. So here we will have 4 total possibilities. Okay, well, now what I want to look at is what are all the different ways that I can get tails and tails. Okay, well, you can do what's called a tree diagram, or we can do a list or a chart or some way just to describe all the possibilities, right? So if at first I flip a heads, right, that's the first one, then the second one could either be heads or the second one could be tails. Okay, and then the first one, if I do a tails, the first one could be heads, and then the second one could be tails. Now notice I try to stay as consistent as possible. So if I start with heads, I'm going to start with heads, and then my second option is tails. If I start with tails, right, the second time, right, and then I shift, to the second option, I start with heads again. And you just want to try to, this is going to really test sort of your level of organization and how systematic you are. Okay, so I look at this and I say, okay, well, how many possibilities include tails and tails? Well, there's only one of them, so 1 out of 4 is what I should get here. And in fact, let's do this. We'll spin this thing 4 times and see if we get tails twice. Okay, so spin. All right, here's the first one. I got tails, tails. Spin it again. Heads, heads. Spin it again. Oh, I got it twice. Spin it again. Heads, heads. So I got spinning this thing, I got heads, heads twice. So that would be my experimental probability, right? So the theoretical probability is this. This is what was supposed to happen based on the outcomes and what we did. When I did actually spin it 4 times, I got it twice, okay? Now, we'll talk about this idea of this other thing later. It's called central tendency. You don't have to write this down, but I'm just going to put this in here. Okay, central tendency. And it talks about more like the idea that the more you perform the experiment, the closer it will get to the actual experimental or theoretical probability. So, all right, so what I want you to do is I want you to try to figure out, for the 5-coin spin, I want you to try to figure out what are the total number of outcomes, okay? And I don't necessarily want you to worry about a specific outcome. I just want to know what are the total possibilities. So what are all the different ways that you can spin those 5 coins, and bring that to class tomorrow. All right, again, let's just determine the number of probabilities that I have here. Okay, the number of possibilities, excuse me. All right, so this is a 0 to 9 counter, okay? A 0 to 9 random number generator. And then if I roll 1 die, okay? I want you to find the total number of outcomes that can happen here, okay? The total, I keep using it, sorry. The total number of possibilities, okay? The total number of outcomes that you can get from this. All right? And then here, I want you to try to tell me what are the total number of possibilities for rolling 2 number cubes, okay? Or 2 dice, right? They have 2 6-sided dice. And I want you to try to come up with all the different possibilities that you can come up with there, okay? And then from there, we'll run a couple of different things tomorrow, and hopefully if you have these notes and you have tried to do these last 3, we can participate in a little activity / game. All right.